Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm your host, Sylvain with Health Issues, and we're totally excited about today. It's actually a totally different show. You know, we usually do politicians and, you know, tons of researchers and a lot of research, and we love research and so forth. But today, actually for the first time, that we have a pastor on, and we're excited to have him. He's Dr. David Crosby. He is the pastor of First Baptist in New Orleans. No, we're not moving from what we're doing, but he's been very, very vocal through the Times-Picayune, and we've picked our interests as a lot of things. But welcome, Dr. Crosby. How are you?
It's nice to be here, Chris. Really is. Great opportunity to share some thoughts I've had along the way.
Along the way. Well, we're excited to have you, and just to be a part. But you have taken a direct interest. We see it through the Times-Picayune into the greater issues of the city.
I do. You know, I was a reporter here for 2 years. I worked for the Times-Picayune, the city desk, when I was a seminary student out in Gentilly. And I'd come in after class, and I'd get my assignment. You know, if there were murders or bank robberies or crime or disasters, whatever, they'd send me over to cover that. So for 2 years, I ran around New Orleans covering all these different things going on in the city, and a lot of it was crime. And just got a burden on my heart about it, you know, and wondered how I might be able to help some way. But I wrote the stories as I thought I should, and then I left. 16 years later, the church calls me and says, we want you to come back. And so in 96, I came back to this city to specialize in good news, not bad news. All right? So
another news organization.
I mean, we got good news to share.
That's right.
And so I love doing what I do, applying the good news where there's often bad news, and letting people know that there is good news even in the midst of the trouble. And so it's been a great time here in New Orleans for these years now, and trying to stay engaged in the community and, you know, work with leadership to find solutions to things that have been long-standing problems, really, in our community.
You hit the nail on the head. Long-standing problems, but to have the gust to tackle them realistically, I think is awesome. So,
well, Jesus had a lot of courage when he was here on earth, and so I'm a follower of him. I'm just trying to follow in his footsteps, and I don't want to be silent where I need to speak, you know, and where the gospel has a clear message as I see it. And so that's really why I speak out through the Times-Picayune and with my people. Sometimes I get in trouble with my people because I realize we don't all agree on things, but usually when I'm speaking, I'm very deeply convicted that the gospel has a perspective on this issue, and I'm seeking to reveal that and unfold it.
Well, he who you follow got in trouble too.
He did. Yep, I follow a Lord who died on a cross, and the government killed him.
Oh, that's good prelude. Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. Capital punishment. You know, you're not going to be finding me outside where they're executing somebody saying, kill him, because my Lord Jesus was somebody who was executed.
That's right. A heavy price.
Yeah.
Hey, we appreciate it. But here we go, and this is the issue that we deal with. Of the young 15 to 35 African American male, the group that the narrative is they've committed a lot of crimes, so they need change in their lives, and so what do we do to help them? But there's another narrative, not that that narrative is untrue, okay, but there's another narrative that says that they're disproportionately arrested, sentenced, and left in prison for same crimes that others commit.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I really do believe that the law is applied unequally, particularly with these violations, drug crimes and things like that. Statistically, the same percentage of people, whether they're white, black, Hispanic, or whatever, are doing drugs. And yet the African American population is disproportionately incarcerated for drug convictions. And that's just, you just stand back and look at it on the face. The facts are there. It's just true. We lock them up more readily, and you know, they don't have the money for defense. Maybe they don't really understand how the system works, possibly. I don't know. I think among the young black men in our community there's an expectation among many of them they're going to jail one day because their dad and their uncles and everybody else has been in jail. But I tell you this, Chris, I think there's a moment in Louisiana for us to bring change in regard to what I would call over-incarceration. Okay. If there's any place in the world that's locking up too many people, it's the state of Louisiana. I would say that because percentage-wise, we have the largest incarceration rate that's documented in the world. Somebody somewhere may be locking up more people than us, but it's not been documented. Documented, we lock up more people than anybody in the world. And I'm not proud of that. And I don't think it's because we have more criminals than anybody in the world, or we got the best justice system in the world and we ferret out those criminals. I don't think those could be the reasons, but I don't think so. I think we lock them up because we think it makes us safer to lock somebody up for a long time if they commit a crime, and we think it's the right thing to do, perhaps. But I think conservatives, and I am part of the Southern Baptist family of churches here in Louisiana. We have 1,400 churches. We are by and large a very conservative group. But this last year we passed a resolution in our state convention challenging our officials and our state to look at the rate of incarceration and seek to find ways to reduce the incarceration rate in the state of Louisiana without endangering public safety.
Fair.
So, fair. And North Carolina has just implemented something I think that's very exciting. They are working on moving people out of prison earlier into the probation parole system so that they can get back into their community and have some supervision during that process of reacclimation to life in the free world. And that makes sense to me. So now the last 9 months of their sentence, they're actually out on probation and parole as a standard practice in North Carolina. And the results that are coming in are very good. So, I mean, I favor all different kind of ways of trying to reduce our incarceration rate. And I do that for a number of reasons. You know, number one, I think it's better for our community. Okay. You know, so many men are gone in some of our neighborhoods. It's just not healthy. We don't have the male role model. We've got other social ills that are fostered because the men are gone, and it's just not the best way to handle the situation we've got. So we've got aging prisoners that we could develop paths for them to get out early. They're much less likely to commit crimes as they age. We don't endanger public safety when we do that. For those who are sick, I don't know if Louisianans know this, but they're about to get a whopping big bill for caring for elderly prisoners. I mean, you lock them up and you throw away the key. Well, who's going to take care of them when they're old and it costs $80,000 a year per prisoner to care for them? I tell you who is, the taxpayer in Louisiana. And unless they act quickly and deliberately on this issue, the cost of incarceration in our state is going to skyrocket. I mean, we got tough on crime 30 years ago. Now all those 20-year-olds are getting in their 50s.
Right, right.
Now they got all those chronic illnesses that we of this age have. And the taxpayers are going to foot the bill.
Right.
And I think it's just a little bit socially insane anyway, to have a guy who's got less than an ounce of marijuana, say, and we catch him with it. And it's his third time. And we, as a state, we say to him, buddy, 3 strikes, you're out. We know you're healthy, you could be working, but for the next 20 years, we're going to buy all your clothes, we're going to buy all your food, we're going to provide all your housing, we're going to take care of all your medical bills. Everything you need, the state of Louisiana is going to provide for you while you're locked up for the next 20 years. Not only that, we're going to take care of your kids while you're gone through government programs and things. There's a kind of insanity to that needs to be addressed in our state. And I favor looking legislatively at the way we're doing incarceration and the way we're doing sentencing, as well as looking at these other opportunities we have and save some of this money and put it back into our communities for reentry programs, for probation and parole that actually help prisoners get reacclimated, get employed, conquer these addiction problems, and get back into their communities contributing citizens. That's what we've got to do. So I believe that's coming. I think it's inevitable. I hope that Louisianians will join in that effort that's across the board. It's business people, it's legislators, it's pastors, it's professors, it's people from every sector of our state who are saying, okay, folks, enough is enough. We've locked up more people than anybody in the world. The crime rate's not gone down. This isn't helping us. We're not safer because of it. Let's figure out some new approaches to this and get going on all fronts at changing the situation we got.
Good stuff. Hey, I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. I think it's, I think a lot of folks are cheering, you know, and standing and saying, hey, let's go forward and get it done. So as we look, as we look at this thing over time, the big picture, some of the same dynamics is postulated that we've dealt with 400 years. You know, we went through slavery. We dealt with this issue of, hey, what do we do with these people? Hey, we get them to work in the fields, and after that, hey, we segregate them off to the side. Never good assimilation. And so just when we thought during the 70s we had kind of conquered this, during the 80s and 70s or 80s, really right after that, you see the incarceration numbers just skyrocket. So for the most part, if people don't look at the statistics, they won't know it's a over-incarceration problem. Without looking at the statistics, we could even miss it. If nobody sees graphs and charts, you know, we would never ever know. But it's almost like here we go again, and the same, is it that we have the same group that was fighting slavery, that was fighting segregation, fighting here, but then do we have the same group that was pushing it out of whatever reason, fear or whatever reason? Are the dynamics the same? And can this time we actually reach not at the finances of it, but the heart of it?
I hope that we can, Chris. I hope we can look at our hearts, because you look around the world now and there's conflict popping up everywhere. Right. But it seems like everywhere there is racism, there is ethnic conflict, there's ethnic cleansing, whether you're in Europe and Croatia or wherever you are in the Far East, in Africa, everywhere around the world. It just seems like people can't get along with folks who are different from them. Right. And when I read the Bible and I read about Jesus, I read that he brought the wall down. Not just between folks of the same ethnicity who already really should have been getting along in the way we look at community, but he brought the wall down between Jews and Gentiles, for instance, between slave and free, for instance. And I am hopeful that people who meet in the churches and other houses of worship in our community will check their own heart for any vestiges of racism, of prejudice within them, because That's got to go. The world is not going to be happy and healthy as long as we put people in these pigeonholes because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background or their culture, whatever it is. We've got to quit doing that. And we have a chance in Louisiana to address that, because what's happened to the African American population is not fair in terms of looking across the board at the rate of crimes, the rate of arrests, even the rates of conviction, and yet the rate of incarceration is disproportionately African American when compared with all of that. So we've got a problem, and we need to address it. We need to address it in our own hearts and communities. I'm a little worried about New Orleans, you know, in the wake of Ferguson and other things that have happened in other communities where there's been violence as a result of white and black conflict and shootings and things like that. I think it's good for us our community to get it out on the table now.
Yes.
Let's talk about what's going on in our hearts. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what's going on in our institutions. There is a perspective. There's a perspective from the point of view of race for every social ill we are trying to address.
True.
Whether it's education, incarceration, public safety, community development, economic development, there is this perspective on race. That's not to say that everything is mostly about race, but to say that race plays a part in so many of the things that we're looking at. And it's so hard to talk about race, Chris. The vocabulary is hard to find sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to talk without coming across as pejorative. But we've got to have a conversation. We've got to continue the conversation. And I appreciate an opportunity to talk about it today. And just to voice my own concern that we as a community find a basis upon which to come together and address the deep difficulties and challenges before us without dividing into camps based on color of skin.
Hey, it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words all the way around. I'll take it from a non-Christian standpoint. Those who, my own experience before I accepted Christ, for years I looked at the Christian church, and I grew up and I ran from it as soon as I could. But I looked at the Christian church, and as the more I studied history, the more I got angry at the Christian church. The more I looked at missionaries going into Africa and missionaries going around, and followed by mercenaries. I said, what are these guys teaching? And I looked through the Holocaust and through the teachings of the Christian church, all as it happened, and I looked, when I was a kid, I couldn't go in most churches. You know, I just wouldn't let me in. You know, like you go to this church, you can't. You know, so as a young kid, I was like, what could be going on? And now, even now, I dig through doctrines to see, did the message change though, even though other folks were let in the churches, that something had to be wrong with the heart of the message. So has that been corrected, or does that have something to do with why we're seeing the comments on NOLA.com and other newspapers? So harsh.
Yeah, I think the human heart is exceedingly wicked and susceptible to sin and to blindness to it. And I think the church has demonstrated a blindness to injustices that are before it down through the ages. Sometimes the church has been in cahoots with the powers that be to propagate these injustices. Sometimes the church has stood up and said, no, we want to do what's right. Martin Luther King was a minister of the gospel. Much of his writing is anchored in the teaching of Jesus. So here's a man who is he is speaking to it. And there were others who did as well. But in my own time, you know, I'm a steward of my time and of my place. I want to be as faithful to the Lord Jesus as I can be. I want to be faithful to Him. And I see Him calling me to love all people, to care for those who don't look like me, to welcome them into the fellowship of faith, which we do. We are a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multicultural congregation, as many congregations are these days, and I celebrate that, you know. I really do. I do not idealize the days of segregation when the churches were segregated. I don't think those were ideal times. I think they were times when there was a great inequity in the church. And I'm glad that we are having much more of a diversity in our congregations now. So that's great, but I want to be faithful in my time. And the church has some responsibilities concerning the inequities and the problems that are in our community. Some responsibility to address them, to speak to them, to get in there and help. So I am encouraging our church and other churches to get your hands dirty in the work of ministry in your community. And I tell people, if you want to know where Jesus is in this community, why, I suspect that his footsteps disappear into the mist of trouble and sorrow in our community. And if you follow his tracks, you're going to find him bending over a wounded guy, binding up his wounds, waiting on you. So I think the church needs to mobilize. And I think these acts of compassion and caring for one another, whatever our ethnicity, our economic standing, these acts of caring for one another, for people who are in trouble and people who are in need, will authenticate the message that we preach. And it will help us come across as real and genuine in our proclamation of the good news. And they are our greatest, in some ways, they are our greatest credentials for the preaching and teaching of the gospel, that we're actually out there seeking to do good.
Well, two things. Something, first, Sim, got a chance to meet one of your members in the prison.
Sim Diano, he's great.
Yeah, faithful every Wednesday right there on D2 in Parish Prison meeting, and it spoke to kind of the heart of what you were doing. You know, we got a chance to talk a lot there. But yet, wrote a piece, and you know, once we connected, I got a chance to get one of the emails concerning the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. Yeah. And but the issue is that it even had to be said that there needs to be more of a balance. That it even had to be discussed. You know, it's like a friend of mine said, a gumbo shop not having gumbo.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the church has demonstrated love of neighbor as an individual's responsibility. You know, I think at the church at large, and I'm not talking just about my church, but the church at large has sort of said, well, we're organized to do the Great Commandment, but you guys make sure that you love your neighbor out there. And so it hasn't really organized to do the Great Commandment, it's organized to do the Great Commission.
That's
to go out and what I'm saying is, let's organize to do the Great Commandment. Let's put it in the structure of our churches. Let's work it into our DNA. Let's measure how we're doing as a congregation, loving our neighbors out there in our community. And let's evaluate it. Let's treat it like we do our other programming and make sure that it's part of the mission of our church. Well,
and as we move forward, your thoughts on this, because I don't know, and I've said it publicly and privately all the time, because I have no idea how much resistance is out there to justice. I talked to a politician, and I've talked to a politician and a couple of legislative people, and they said they've been pushing for the justice issue for 20 years and not getting anything on incarceration. The only reason the door is open now is because of the marijuana issue, and people are realizing how much it costs.
Yeah.
The financial issue. Yeah. And I'm saying that's nuts. That has nothing to do with justice. You know what I mean? Suppose justice was more expensive.
Yeah.
Then would it be? So how much resistance do you feel, you know, that could be? Again, the only thing I know is NOLA.com in the comments section.
Yeah.
And because of technology, and it's frightening to read every single day some of the comments.
Well, to me, politics is the science of compromise, all right? And so we're talking about political solutions in large measure. These things have to be changed at Baton Rouge. We've got to get some laws passed that address it, because it's the laws that have filled up the prisons. And whatever our motivation was, we're going to have to address it that way to get it done. So my view is, whatever your motivation, if it's dollars, if it's justice, whatever it is, let's get to the table and talk about solutions. Okay. And so I'm very pragmatic about it. But I want people to realize the injustice of it as well. And that is a hard issue. And I think that there are many people that see the injustice of over-incarceration. But for me, on the and actually changing things, we're going to have to get a coalition together of people who may have different concerns and perspectives, but are willing to work on the same problem together.
I agree, but when I think about 1776, they threw politics out the window, and those guys, which we weren't included, but still, you know, they could care less about Britain's justice.
Yeah, well, they thought they were addressing great injustice, and the Declaration lists out all the injustices that King George had done to them. So they thought they were justified in revolting because of the injustice of the king and of the system that they were under, you know. So, but I agree with you. I agree that there are questions of justice here that must be addressed, and they ought to be primary, because we're talking about the dignity of our neighbor and his great infinite worth in the sight of God. And so I'm with you on that.
Good deal. Chris Sylvain, Health Issues, Dr. David Crosby. This is a time. We have an opportunity in Louisiana. We're at the top of the charts in a lot of ways, but I think this is the biggest way, that what we do here in Louisiana and New Orleans is key also, can really set the pace for the rest of the world. Let's work together. Fight as hard as you can. Thank you. Thank you, sir.